Second Chronicles chapter 24. Yes, ma'am. That's right. I appreciate Johnny filling in for me last week. 24. Second Chronicles 24. We were very ill, and so we'll pick back up in Chronicles today. And Second Chronicles chapter 24. Second Chronicles chapter 24 is about King Joash, who has a really bright beginning and then sort of becomes a disappointment in the end. And as we've been looking at, Second Chronicles is all about the idea of a loyal heart. Kind of what does it take to really develop the kind of heart that sticks with it, that stays faithful to God? And it does it through the perspective of the different kings. And so we have Joash, and kind of the point of Joash's story is going to be that a loyal heart makes its faith its own. It makes its faith its own. That's really a crucial and a key thing really throughout the Bible. You find so many passages that describe how if we don't make our faith our own, if we're leaning on somebody else's faith, something is bound to happen that causes us to lose our faith. And so Joash is going to teach us about how a loyal heart makes its faith its own in 2 Chronicles chapter 24. It opens at verse 1 and it says, Joash was 7 years old when he became king. And so I know it's been 2 weeks since we've looked at this, so just a reminder, the way that he became king is because his grandmother, Queen Athaliah, before she became queen, or at the time that she became queen, she had all of her children and all of her grandchildren destroyed. And Joash's aunt just happened to save him, or I say just happened, we know it's providence, but she saved him and hid him away for 7 years. And then at the end of that 7 years, the high priest Jehoiada, who's going to be very important in chapter 24 as well, the high priest Jehoiada anointed or crowned Joash as king, and that was the end of the reign of Athaliah. And so here we have a 7-year-old boy. He has become king, and he reigned 40 years in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Zibiah of Beersheba. And Joash did what was right in the sight of the Lord, but here's the key, all the days of Jehoiada the priest. It starts off seeming very good, just like many of the other good kings. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. But normally it follows that with, like his father David, or like his father, whoever it chooses to mention. And instead it says, all the days of Jehoiada the priest. Joash is someone who did what was right until the person whom he leaned his faith on was no longer there. Verse 3, it says, Jehoiada took wives for him, and he had sons and daughters. Now, I think what's important about that verse is he's now grown. They want us to understand that the events that follow aren't happening when he's a 7-year-old boy. He started out as a 7-year-old boy. He reigned 40 years. And so all the things that happen after this are happening after he is a grown man. It makes perfect sense to me that when he was 7, his faith was not his own. Right? We don't expect 7-year-olds to have that kind of faith. They go to church because their parents take them to church, even if they like going. It's all, they go and they do those things because of their parents. Not saying that 7-year-olds can't believe in God, but at that time in your life, you're really doing it because you've been raised to do it. It's when you become an adult that you really have to make that choice for yourself. Am I going to continue to do these things, or am I not going to continue to do these things? So he's an adult here, and it says in verse 4, it happened after this that Joash set his heart on repairing the house of the Lord. Now we're going to come back to that. Remember verse 4. But he had this plan. There's something about the house of the Lord that's not quite in order. It's not quite how it's supposed to be. And so he determines himself. He says, I want to fix it. I'm the king. He's grown up. It seems like he is a faithful person. It says he gathered the priests and the Levites, and he said to them, go out to the cities of Judah and gather from all Israel money to repair the house of your God from year to year, and see that you do it quickly. All right, so he has this plan. He wants it done. And he wants it done today, as soon as possible. However, the Levites did not do it quickly. And so you have this king, and he really wants to fix the house of the Lord. But the people are a little sluggish. They're not so excited about it as he is. The king called Jehoiada, the chief priest. Remember, this is the man who raised him. This is the high priest who made him king and who instigated all of those things that got rid of Athaliah. It says the king called Jehoiada the priest and said to him, "Why have you not required the Levites to bring in from Judah and from Jerusalem the collection, according to the commandment of Moses the servant of the Lord, and of the assembly of Israel, for the tabernacle of witness?" And so, in essence, what he's saying is, we are out of compliance, right? We are not obeying completely the law of Moses. He's trying to do things God's way. And in this moment, it even seems like his faith has surpassed Jehoiada's, because Jehoiada is in charge of the Levites, and the king has given the Levites this instruction, and they've kind of dragged their feet, and Jehoiada hasn't put them to the fire, as it were, to get them to hurry up and to get this done. He sees that they're not obeying God. He says, let's get back to obeying God as quickly as we possibly can. Verse 7, for the sons of Athaliah, that wicked woman, they're always going to mention that when she comes up, has broken into the house of God and has also presented, she's dead now. She had broken into the house of God and it also presented all the dedicated things of the house of the Lord to Baals. And so Baals, of course, being false gods, what he's saying is, when Athaliah was queen, she took things out of God's temple and put them in the Baal temple that was there. Now, after Athaliah died, we were told that they tore down Baal's temple, but apparently some of the things that belonged in the house of God, they have not yet moved it back to where it belongs. And the people are supposed to, the Levites, if you remember, were set aside. They were the one tribe who did not have a land of their own. They weren't given a space as a tribe, because their inheritance from God, if you will, was to be the priest. And so every tribe gave them some cities to live in, and then their job was to serve as priests or serve as Levites, and to go to the temple at different times of year to help out the high priest who lived in Jerusalem. And so because they have this particular job, they weren't supposed to have to worry about farming and all of those kinds of things. The other tribes were supposed to be paying them so that they could just focus on this duty and not worry about those other kinds of problems to feed their family. And that's why he wants the money collected, because they're not doing that. And so the Levites are having to do all of their job and raise food and so forth and so on in order to provide for their families. It's just, apparently it was just too much for one family or for this group of people to do in God's eyes. And so God set it up that way. You'd think of all people, the Levites would be excited about making this happen, you know? And perhaps they drag their feet because they are so busy raising food and such. It doesn't really tell us why they drag their feet. We just know that they do. So in verse 8, at the king's command, they made a chest. They set it outside at the gate of the house of the Lord. They made a proclamation throughout Judah and Jerusalem to bring to the Lord the collection that Moses, the servant of God, right? When you see Moses' name, you know they're talking about law. This is not just somebody's idea. They're talking about what Moses had commanded them to do. And so the collection that Moses, the servant of God, had imposed on Israel in the wilderness. And so all the leaders and all the people rejoiced, right? Everybody is excited. They want to obey God correctly. They're happy to give of their funds to do it. It just hadn't been being done, and so they weren't doing it. But he says they rejoiced, and they brought their contributions. They put them into the chest until all had given. They felt grateful to God and to the Levites for what they were doing, and so they were pleased to participate. And it was at that time, when the chest was brought to the king's officials by the hand of the Levites, and when they saw that there was much money, that the king's scribe and high priest officer came, they emptied the chest, they took it and returned it to its place, and thus they did day by day, and they gathered money in abundance. And so this king sets his heart, right? This is one of the key phrases in the book of Chronicles. The king sets his heart to do something. Very similar to Ezra chapter 7 and verse 10. Ezra set his heart to seek the law of the Lord and to do it and to teach statutes and ordinances in Israel. It's what a person determines to do day by day that determines if they're faithful or not. He set his heart to repair the house of the Lord, and so God blesses that, and the people are happy to participate. And it says they have an abundance of money. And so the king and Jehoiada gave it to those who did the work of the service of the house of the Lord, and they hired masons and carpenters to repair the house of the Lord, and also those who worked in iron and bronze to restore the house of the Lord. The workmen labored, and the work was completed by them. They restored the house of God to its original condition. They reinforced it, and when they had finished, they brought the rest of the money before the king and Jehoiada. They made it from articles for the house of the Lord, articles for serving and offering, spoons and vessels of gold and silver. And they offer burnt offerings in the house of the Lord continually, all the days of Jehoiada. Now, there's another one of those little clues. It should say all the days of Joash, right? Because he's the king, and as long as he commands it, the people will continue to do it. It doesn't say that, unfortunately. It says all the days of Jehoiada. And he goes into so much detail about what they restored and what they did, because he's showing us they did it to the T, right? They crossed every T and dotted every I. They read the law of Moses closely. They determined they were going to do it according to the law of Moses. They hired the right people to get the job done down to every last detail, because he determined, I'm going to repair the house of the Lord. They're trying to do what's right. And when we try to do what's right, God blesses that and allows us the peace and the freedom to continue to do what's right. And so, any thoughts or comments on what we've looked at so far?
I'll go right back to the very first of that.
Yes.
God is blessing them, and it looks like He is blessing Jehoiada also for what He's doing, because everything is working out. I go back to the first of it. Jehoiada took 2 wives for the king.
Yes.
Was that custom more than God just allowed it at the time?
Yes, and the law of Moses describes marriage in Deuteronomy 24, 1 through 4, and it describes, about divorce. It's really very similar to Matthew 19 as far as divorce is only for that one uncleanness, and what can happen to a person after that. But it was something that Jesus says in Matthew 19. He says, from the beginning, God intended one man and one woman, and that's always how it was supposed to be. But in Acts chapter 17, Paul describes it this way. He says, God, the old King James says, God winked at those things, and it's kind of the idea he allowed it for a time because the people didn't understand. That's what Jesus says, because of the hardness of your hearts, Moses allowed some of these things. Right, yes. But, by the time that we get to the New Testament, those things are not allowed anymore. Yes, ma'am?
I always thought it was because when the flood came and just left Noah and his family, that where God said, go forth and multiply, that was allowed more wives so they could multiply.
Well, I think maybe they're, Jesus says God intended one man and one woman, but from a practical perspective, I think you're correct as far as they did those things, and it did help them multiply across the earth quicker. And so, but yeah, it was a custom, especially for kings. Kings had this custom of marrying more than one wife, and so in part to help ensure that you have a son, so that you have a descendant, and in part kind of a political marriage sort of thing. And so the Bible records what has happened. It's not necessarily approving of what is happening. So, yes, sir.
Well, sort of. In the beginning, God said Adam and not to Eve.
That's right.
So based on that, maybe he didn't explain it, but he's going to use that as an example.
Wrong, right? Yes. No, but you're absolutely right, and that's why Jesus says they should have figured it out, because he says in Matthew 19, he says from the beginning, this is we will not spend long here, but let's just turn to Matthew 19 for just a moment and look at the. In Matthew 19, actually, let's look at it in Mark chapter 10, because they say the same thing, but the question that they ask, I think, helps make it plain in Mark chapter 10. In Mark chapter 10 and verse 2, right, the Pharisees were always trying to trap Jesus, always trying to get him to say something wrong or something. in Mark chapter 10 and verse 2, it says that the Pharisees asked, is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife? It says they were testing him. And so Jesus says, what did Moses command you, right? What is the command of Moses? And of course, I think probably most Jews thought back to Deuteronomy 24 because Moses wrote there the commands about divorce. But when he answers his own question, he says in verse 6, from the beginning of the creation, God made them male and female. So what he's saying is Moses' first command about marriage is in Genesis chapter 2, not in Deuteronomy chapter 24. And so he says in verse 7, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh, right? This is the command of Moses. One woman, one man, joined as if one flesh. They're no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let not man separate. And so the general rule, without going into the exception clause that Matthew 19 and Matthew 5 have, the general rule is if you're married, don't divorce. And that's the basis of it. It comes, Moses' command is in Genesis chapter 2. And so what Jesus is implying here is they should have figured that out. They should have read Genesis chapter 2 and realized this is when the command begins. This is God's model. This is what the family is when it's at its absolute best. And the fact that they didn't figure that out is on them. By the time you get to the New Testament, Jesus makes all of that very plain. All right, so back in Duck, that's a good. Thank you, Johnny. I appreciate that. Back in 2 Chronicles 24, all right, it kind of goes downhill after this. Starting in verse 15, Jehoiada grew old, and he was full of days, and he died. And he was 130 years old when he died. Most people, you go back far enough in the Bible, and it's not too uncommon for people to live 130 years. But by the time of Jehoiada, living 130 years is very unusual. And I think it goes to show, no matter how old you are, if you are still alive, you have some purpose to serve, right? God did not let him die until 130 because he was still serving some purpose. He was still giving Joash, I think, a chance to make his faith his own. So he lives 130 years, and they buried him in the city of David. And notice this, among the kings. I'm not sure about this. I didn't have time to look that far into it, but I can't think of another mention of a non-royal person being buried with the kings. This is a high honor. And you think, in essence, especially for the first years of Joash's life, Jehoiada really was, in essence, the king. He has a 7-year-old boy. Jehoiada is really running the country. And so they honor him very highly because he had done good in Israel, both toward God and his house. Right? And so, again, this is the common theme. If you love and if you have a loyal heart to God, God honors you. Yes, ma'am, Miss Faye.
Thinking, and I don't remember who it was, we just recently read about one being buried in the city of David, but he wasn't buried among the kings.
That's right. That's right, yes. Another one of the kings. Yes, ma'am. They did bury him in the city. Even though he is a king, they did not bury him with the king. And I think that's the one where it said they were all glad that he died. They were relieved that it was over. But yes, ma'am, that's right. And so it's not, even if you're a king, it's not a given that you're buried there. This is really, truly a high honor. That's a good point, Ms. Faith. Verse 17, they honor him at his death, but they don't continue to honor him after his death. After the death of Jehoiada, the leaders of Judah came, and they bowed down to the king, right? You get the sense these people have just been waiting for their opportunity. As soon as Jehoiada is dead, here they are, bowing to the king, and the king listened to them. Therefore, they left the house of the Lord God of their fathers, and they served wooden images, and they served idols, and wrath came upon Judah and Jerusalem because of their trespass. They start worshiping false gods. And so just like God always does, he sends a discipline of some kind because he's trying to get them to realize you have gone into sin. He's trying to get them to realize they need to repent because any other way of living is only going to lead to heartache and to devastation. He doesn't want that for them.
That was one of the very first commandments that Moses gave.
That's right.
God gave to Moses, tell him, right the very first, don't worship anything else.
Any idols, yeah. I believe it's the second of the 10 commandments. I believe so. And yet God sent prophets to them to bring them back to the Lord. And they testified against them. but they would not listen. And this is what God does. He sends people to teach. He sends people trying to convince them, this is a mistake. You're going to regret where this goes. But Joash's faith is now leaning on somebody else. And that's what happens. If you don't make your faith your own, then when the person that you are counting on, when the person whose faith you're leaning on is no longer there, or when they change their mind about what they believe, or what have you, you're going to go with that, or you're going to just jump on the next train that's going by. Where can I attach my faith to now? His faith is no longer his own, or never was. It's no longer true to God, because it was always really, he believed in Jehoiada. The Spirit of God came upon Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada the priest. Right? So this is Jehoiada's son, who stood above the people and said to them, thus says God, why do you transgress the commandments of the Lord, so that you cannot prosper? Because you have forsaken the Lord. He has also forsaken you. And so they conspired against him. And at the command of the king, right, this is Joash. In essence, this is his brother. They were raised by the same man. At the command of the king, they stoned him with stones in the court of the house of the Lord. And Joash the king did not remember the kindness which Jehoiada his father had done to him, but killed his son, and he died. And he said, the Lord look on it and repay. And so this righteous man who is trying to continue keeping the people on the right path, Joash says, I put my faith somewhere else now. And he's gone all the way, right? It's an extreme change, because he won't stand on his own 2 feet as far as his faith is concerned. And the question is, what is the difference? Let's go back and compare him to some of the other kings. Notice 2 Chronicles chapter 12 and verse 14. 2 Chronicles chapter 12 and verse 14. This is what's said about King Rehoboam, who had a good start, but was ultimately a very wicked king. It says in 2 Chronicles 12:14, it says, he did evil because he did not prepare his heart to seek the Lord. Right? He didn't prepare himself. This was not a choice that he continued to make to seek the Lord, and that's why he did evil. All right, now also notice chapter 14 and verse 4. Chapter 14 and verse 4. This is about King Asa, who was a very good king. It says, he commanded Judah to seek the Lord God of their fathers and to observe the law and the commandments, right? And so here's the opposite of Rehoboam. He commands them, but what does he command them to seek specifically? To seek God and to seek the law, right? They are seeking after God himself, and connected with that, because that's how they know what God wants. They're seeking the law. Notice chapter 20 and verse 3. Chapter 20 and verse 3, this is King Jehoshaphat. And this is when the army came against him, and he was terrified. It says, Jehoshaphat feared, and he set himself to seek the Lord. All right, so what is Jehoshaphat seeking in particular? He is seeking God. He is seek the Lord. He proclaimed a fast for all of Judah. Now back to Joash, chapter 24 and verse 4. Notice, it's subtle, but notice the difference. Now it happened after this that Joash set his heart, right? That's the key phrase. He's determining to do something on repairing the house of the Lord. What's missing? It doesn't say he's seeking the Lord himself. Or the law. Although clearly he knew the law, because that's how he knew to do this. But yeah, he's not seeking that in particular. He's just seeking to do one particular thing, which what he did was a good thing. You know, he was living a righteous life at this time. But what it shows us is it's possible to seek the works of God without seeking God himself. You can be doing the right things, knowing it's the right thing because God's word said so.
So the other thing is he set out actually when you read this, repair the house of the Lord. You want to repair it physically.
Right.
Not
a physical focus. That's right. He's got a physical focus, and that's if you just set your heart to do something, right? That's going to be a focus on the physical. Whereas the other kings that we described, they set their heart to seek God, and that's what led them to do things. They did the right things because they wanted to be close to God. it doesn't say that about Joash. And this is very common today. This is, I come to church because my parents went to church, right? I do what I do because my priest or my preacher told me to do these things, right? It's that one time, I know I've mentioned this before, but one time I read this survey where people had gone to individuals who had fallen away from the church, and they asked them, they said, what reason do you not go to church anymore? And it very rarely, if ever, was because the people there weren't doing what was right, or it was always something like the preacher, one day he said something and I just didn't like it, or nobody noticed when my father was in the hospital and they didn't come visit me, or the elders, one day an elder snapped at me and I haven't been back to church since then. And while, we should always be careful what we do, and we don't want to be a stumbling block to anybody, what that shows us is their faith was in the people. Right? Their faith was in the elder or the preacher or the congregation. And you won't find better people on earth than God's people. But we are just human, and we all are going to make mistakes, and we're going to hurt each other sometimes. And if your faith is in the people, like his faith is in Jehoiada, eventually you're going to fall away. Yes.
I know what you're talking about, and I agree with it, but the deal is, would we want Christ for God to treat us that way? If we snapped at God, would we want him to just leave us?
That's right.
You see, there's always this parallel.
Yes.
That goes down. We have rules for ourselves, but hey, God, you're God, and I'm me, and I'm special, so you just forgive me. But
that's right.
I didn't really like that guy anyway.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, I didn't like him anyway. No, I think you're absolutely right. That's it's not consistent either with what they expect from God, and that's what you would expect from someone who hasn't made their faith their own. And it's just so unfortunate because they probably have done lots of good things for God, but when we allow our faith to be dependent upon somebody else, there will come some time when that is not possible for whatever reason anymore, because that's the person that hurt you, or because they die, or because they change their mind, or whatever it may be. And then you're left floundering and reaching for whatever's next. He's left floundering, and so the first people that come see him, these rulers who want to bring back idol worship, he just latches on. So important that we make our faith our
There's a
home.
little deal going around on Facebook that I keep seeing. It's about you'll go to McDonald's and get an order wrong, maybe 100 times, but you'll keep going back to McDonald's. But you go to church and they'll say something to you one time and you won't go back.
You won't go back. That's right. Yes. And the church is
That's so true.
So true.
Yeah.
Yeah. His faith.
But, there are some that is so weak in their faith that they're just kind of looking for an excuse.
Yes, that's true.
They really don't want to come, they just feel obligated.
Yes, you're right.
That's sad, but it is true.
It's sad. And it's possible to sit in the pews of a church your entire life, and you could die in Bible class one Sunday morning, but if you never make your faith your own, it's not going to make a difference.
It looks like Joash was looking for praise from the people because it says that everybody liked what he was doing in the temple.
Yes.
He was looking for the praise because he was doing curb appeal, what I call curb appeal.
Yes.
Making it look nice, and he was receiving the praise from it. And just as soon as that stopped, or the person that was actually doing what they're supposed to,
If being righteous were popular today, politicians would do that, because it's just whatever is going to get you the most votes, and that it seems like Joash is very much maybe there. Yeah.
What gets me though is these kings had the examples before of what happened to the kings that went awry.
Yes.
They had big problems,
Mhm.
and yet they never learned from that. I guess they thought they were special.
I think people do sometimes. Yes. I'm the exception, and there's probably lots of reasons, but it just goes to show that if you don't make your faith your own, you're doomed to repeat that history. And that's what happens here. It says in verse 22, as he dies, it says, the Lord look on it and repay. And that's exactly what happens. Verse 23, it happened in the spring of the year that the army of Syria, right, this is what happens. There's always that discipline that follows. The army of Syria came up against him, and they came to Judah and Jerusalem. They destroy all the leaders of the people, right? The ones who convinced Joash to go down this path. They lose their lives in this war from among the people, and they sent all their spoil to the king of Damascus, all those riches that they thought they were going to get from worshiping the idols. It's gone. For the army of the Syrians came with a small company. Notice this is the opposite of what it normally is. They came with a small company of men. And it says, but the Lord delivered a very great army into their hand. The Israelites had the advantage. They very rarely have the advantage. They have the advantage in numbers, but they lost anyway because they had forsaken the Lord God of their fathers. And so they executed judgment against Joash. And then, when they had withdrawn from him, for they left him severely wounded, his own servants conspired against him because of the blood of the sons of Jehoiada the priest, and they killed him on his bed. So he died, and they buried him in the city of David. But, just like was mentioned earlier, they did not bury him in the tombs of the kings. A man who has left God has no honor in the end. And that's a continuous theme. Was there a hand over this way?
Although I said, we're talking about the people not coming back to church for the different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
How we know we're human, but we're supposed to have our heart right with God. And he tells us if we have something against our brother, we're to go to him.
Yes.
Or if it feels like it's a higher matter, you go to the elders of the church
Right.
to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
But being human, it's hard to do that.
It is hard. It's hard. And, we certainly sympathize with people. But at the end of the day, like you said, if there's conflict, he's given us very good paths to deal with conflict. A loyal heart is going to trust that path and follow it and trust that God's going to work it out in the end. They wouldn't have left if otherwise. So, all right, now verse 26, these are the ones who conspired against him. Zabid, the son of Shemeith, the Ammonitess, and Jehozabad, the son of Shemrith, the Moabitess, right? I think that's important. These people, they clearly wanted for God's laws to be followed, but they might not be as familiar with God's laws as other people because their mothers are not from Israel. Remember what David did when Saul was king and he was not a righteous king? He would not touch the Lord's anointed. These people don't have that kind of honor toward the Joash is wrong, but he is still the Lord's anointed. Possibly they didn't know too because of their background. Now concerning his sons and the many oracles about him and the repairing of the house of God, indeed they are written in the annals of the books of the kings. And then Amaziah, his son, reigned in his place. And so, all right, he has no honor in the end. Moving on then to any last comments before we move on to Amaziah? Yes.
It's not really related, but it stood out to me. In the companion book, 2 Kings,
Mhm.
it tells more about whenever he was taking the collection from the people, and he commanded them. And I see a parallel there between us today. We're commanded to give,
Mm-hmm.
but you give what your heart. Well, in 2 Kings, when he told the people to give to help build the house of the Lord, he said to them, every man is set, let's see where it is, the money that every man is set, and all the money that comes into any man's heart to bring into the home of the
Mhm.
Lord. So,
Very similar.
the heart still was very important in giving, even in the Old Testament. They were commanded to give certain amounts and things like that, but God many times has said, it's your attitude
Right.
toward
How much you
anything
choose
you
to
did, not
give.
just giving, but even
Mhm.
if you're obeying his commands, if you're doing it just, without love or anything else in your heart, and that was the same with that giving. They
That's
did
right.
give, but he actually told them to give what their heart told them to give.
That's right. Yes, that's doing it with your heart. Doing it. That's without. If I have all of these things but not love, I'm a sounding gong or a clanging cymbal. That whether we're giving or however we obey, it matters that we're doing it with purpose, and which is very much what 2 Chronicles is about. I appreciate that, Melanie. All right, chapter 25. This is about his son Amaziah. I remember his father has been assassinated, so he's 40 years in, but he's come to an untimely death. Amaziah was 25 years old when he became king, and he reigned 29 years in Jerusalem. And his mother's name was Jehoadan of Jerusalem, and he did what was right in the sight of the Lord, but, and here's another but, not with a loyal heart. This kind of gets right down to the theme of the whole book. He appears righteous, but kind of like his father, he's doing it for the wrong reasons. Verse 3, we see he knew God's law very well. It happened as soon as the kingdom was established for him that he executed his servants who had murdered his father the king. However, he did not execute their children, but did as it is written in the law of the book of Moses, where the Lord commanded, saying, The fathers shall not be put to death for their children, nor shall the children be put to death for their fathers, but a person shall die for his own sin. Many of the conspirators of the Bible did not, or the kings against the conspirators of the Bible did not do this, but he's very careful. It's righteous and just to put to death the conspirators. They had broken the law, but not to kill their children. Right? And the reason kings would kill their children is to keep vengeance from coming back on them. But the law of Moses said, just trust God with that. Right? We don't kill children for the sins of their fathers. And so, again, he appears very righteous. But eventually, what's in his heart comes out. That's verse 5. Moreover, Amaziah gathered Judah together and set over them captains of thousands and captains of hundreds, according to their fathers' houses, throughout all Judah and Benjamin. And he numbered them from 20 years old and above, and found them to be 300,000 choice men, able to go to war, who could handle the spear and the shield. Also, here's kind of the catch, he hired 100,000 mighty men of valor from Israel, that's the northern kingdom, for 100 talents of silver. Now, if Jehoshaphat taught us anything, it's that joining forces with the northern kingdom does not go well. For a man who knows the law so well, he's kind of ignoring that fact. But a man of God came to him, saying, O king, do not let the army of Israel go with you, for the Lord is not with Israel. He is not with any of the children of Ephraim. But if you go, be gone. Be strong in battle. Even so, God shall make you fall before the enemy, for God has power to help, and he has power to overthrow. In other words, if you go with these hired men, you're not going to win. Now, the obvious thing to do, don't take the hired men. Just trust God is going to work it out. But notice what Amaziah's main concern is. Then Amaziah said to the man of God, but what shall we do about the 100 talents which I have given to the troops of Israel? Right? I've already paid these men. I want my money back. They're not going to give me my money back. He's going into a war. If he wins, there's going to be spoils beyond number. And he's worried about a few hundred talents. And the man answered, the Lord is able to give you much more than this. Right? That's the idea. So Amaziah discharged the troops. Right? Again, he appears righteous. But that's Matthew chapter 12 and verses 34 to 35. Matthew 12, 34 to 35 says, if you want to know what's in your heart, listen to your words. Eventually, the things that you say will reveal to you what's really important to you.
Matthew what?
Matthew 12, 34 to 35. Matthew 12, 34 to 35. If you want to know what's in your heart, listen to your words. When we listen to his words, what we hear is, wealth is what is in his heart. So Amaziah discharged the troops that had come to him from Ephraim to go back home. Therefore, their anger was greatly aroused against Judah. They wanted to participate in the spoils too, and they returned home in great anger. Then Amaziah strengthened himself, and leading his people, he went to the valley of Salt and killed 10,000 of the people of Seir. Now, probably this happened in about the same region where Sodom and Gomorrah used to be. That's the valley of Salt that they are in. Also, the children of Judah from the top of the rock, so they were all dashed in pieces, rather horrifying. But as for the soldiers of the army which Amaziah had, they would not go with him to battle. They raided the cities of Judah from Samaria to Beth-horon, 1,000 in them, and took much spoil. So the army is away. There's no one to stop us. We want the spoil of war, so we'll just make our own war. And they go and they attack Amaziah's region and kill 300,000 people and took much spoil. Now it was so, after Amaziah came from the slaughter of the Edomites, that here we see he's lost a lot of spoil. He gained a lot. He lost a lot when they attacked his own land. And so we kind of see the pettiness that is in his heart. When he got back from the slaughter of the Edomites, that he brought the gods of the people of Seir, set them up to be his gods, and bowed down before them and burned incense to them, right? You promised me, God, and if you're going to let people take wealth from me, I'm not going to worship you anymore, right? He's throwing a hissy fit, right? This is a temper tantrum that he's throwing. Therefore, the anger of the Lord was aroused against Amaziah, and he sent him a prophet who said to him, why have you sought the gods of the people which could not rescue their own people from your hand? Right? This is all righteous people in the Bible are always incredulous at this. Our God is clearly greater than their God. You won the battle. How could you then trust them? Clearly, I'm stronger than them, and so how could you do that? And so it was as he talked with him that the king said to him, "Have we made you the king's counselor? Cease. Why should you be killed?" And the prophet ceased and said, "I know that God has determined to destroy you because you have done this and have not heeded my voice." And so his true colors are hinted at. Now they really come out. His pride and desire for wealth then leads to more poor choices. Verse 17, Amaziah, king of Judah, asked advice and sent to Joash, the son of Jehoahaz, the son of Jehu, king of Israel, saying, "Come, let us face one another in battle." Right? He had one great victory, on to the next one. And Joash, king of Israel, sent to Amaziah, king of Judah, saying, "The thistle that was in Lebanon said to the cedar that was in Lebanon." Right? So a thistle is a little bitty plant, and a cedar is a huge, tall tree, some of the biggest trees in the world. And he said, the thistle said to the cedar, "Give your daughter to my son as wife." And a wild beast that was in Lebanon passed by and trampled the thistle. And so the thistle spoke to the tree, and the thistle got trampled. "Indeed, you say that you have defeated the Edomites, and your heart is lifted up to boast. Stay at home now. Why did you meddle with trouble, and that you should fall, you and Judah with you?" But Amaziah would not heed, for it came from God, that he might give them into the hand of their enemies, because they sought the gods of Edom. And so Joash, king of Israel, went out, and he and Amaziah, king of Judah, faced one another at Beth Shemesh, which belongs to Judah. And Judah was defeated by Israel, and every man fled to his tent. And Joash, the king of Israel, captured Amaziah, king of Judah, the son of Joash, the son of Jehoahaz, at Beth Shemesh, and he brought him to Jerusalem and broke down the wall of Jerusalem from the gate of Ephraim to the corner gate, 400 cubits. And he took all the gold and silver, all the articles that were found in the house of God with Obed-Edom, right? All that stuff that his father had worked so hard to get in place, it's gone now. The treasures of the king's houses, he took hostages, and he returned to Samaria, right? His pride, because he had wealth over God, it led to pride and more foolish choices. He falls. Right? Proverbs chapter 28 and verse 22. Proverbs 28 and verse 22 says, a man which has an evil eye hastens after riches." Right? That's their evil eye. Their eye is focused on wealth. They'll do anything to have wealth, and does not consider that poverty will come upon him. This is the more that you're focused on having wealth, the more that is the mean. And there are some people, the meaning of their life is obtaining more wealth. The more you're focused on that, the more likely you're going to make such a big, foolish decision that you lose it all. Right? Also, of course, we know Proverbs 16:18, pride comes before a fall. And so he is rejected and buried as an honorless king. Amaziah, the son of Joash, king of Judah, lived 15 years after the death of Joash, the son of Jehoahaz, king of Israel. And the rest of the acts of Amaziah, from first to last, indeed, are they not written in the book of the kings of Judah and Israel? After the time of Amaziah turned away from following the Lord, they made a conspiracy against him in Jerusalem. This is becoming a theme. And he fled to Lachish, but they sent after him to Lachish and killed him there. And they brought him on horses and buried him with his fathers in the city of Judah. Now it says they buried him with his fathers, but I don't think that means they buried him with the kings. Remember, as we mentioned, they are now getting a rather sizable cemetery of honorless kings. I think those are the fathers that are being referenced here. It doesn't say specifically, but that seems, the last king they conspired to kill, they did not bury him with the kings. I think that's probably true here too. All right, any last comments? If not, we will wrap up there and pick up next week with King Uzziah, who's a very interesting king.